There are stories of missionaries who traveled to foreign lands for a season. But then there are those rare souls who gave their entire lives to become something beautiful in their adopted homeland. This is the story of Ruth Elton, a woman who arrived in Nigeria as a 3-year-old child and chose to pour out her entire existence as an offering of love to the people who became her family. Her life was a remarkable testament to selfless service, deep faith, and an unwavering commitment that transformed not only countless individual lives, but helped shape the spiritual landscape of an entire nation. Picture a young English girl who would grow up to speak Yoruba more fluently than many native speakers, who would choose Nigerian citizenship over her birthright, and who would declare with complete sincerity that she loved Nigeria so much she could die for it. This is the extraordinary journey of Ruth Elton, a woman whose story bridges two worlds and demonstrates what happens when someone truly embraces the call to lay down their life for others. Born on September 7, 1933, in Bradford, England, Ruth entered the world as the precious only child of Sydney Granville Elton and Hannah Elton. But her English birth was merely the beginning of a story that would unfold thousands of miles away in the heart of West Africa. Her parents were not ordinary English citizens pursuing typical British dreams. They were British missionaries with hearts set aflame by a divine calling to carry the gospel to Nigeria, a land they had never seen but felt irresistibly drawn to serve. Sydney, known affectionately as Pa Elton, and Hannah had committed their lives to something far greater than personal comfort or security. They were part of a movement of faith that was sweeping across denominational lines in the early 20th century, a revival fire that was sending ordinary people to extraordinary places to share the love of Christ with those who had never heard it. Their destination was Nigeria, and their mission was to work alongside one of the most remarkable evangelists Africa had ever produced. In July 1937, when Ruth was barely 3 years old, the Elton family set sail for Nigeria under the auspices of the Apostolic Church of Nigeria. They had been specifically sent to work alongside Joseph Ayo Babalola, a renowned Nigerian evangelist whose ministry was setting the spiritual landscape of West Africa ablaze with revival fire. Little did they know that their young daughter, who took her first steps on African soil as a toddler, would never really leave. The family initially settled in Elisa, in what is now Osun State, a bustling Yoruba town that would become like a second birthplace for young Ruth. Later, they moved to Okene in Kogi State, where Ruth would spend much of her childhood and where the trajectory of her future ministry would be established. These were not easy transitions for any family, but especially challenging for parents trying to raise a young child in a culture vastly different from everything they had known. Growing up in Nigeria during the colonial period was an experience that shaped Ruth in ways that would define her entire life. She was not simply living as a foreigner in a strange land. She was being woven into the very fabric of Nigerian society. While other missionary children might have been sent back to England for education and cultural formation, Ruth remained, absorbing the languages, customs, and heart rhythms of her adopted homeland. She was immersed in a missionary environment shaped by her parents' complete dedication to spreading the gospel, but it was more than just religious instruction that formed her character. She watched her father, Pa Elton, mentor key Nigerian Pentecostal leaders who would go on to transform the spiritual landscape of the nation. One of these leaders was Benson Idahosa, who would later become one of Nigeria's most influential pastors and evangelists. Ruth observed firsthand how her father invested his life in raising up indigenous church leadership rather than maintaining foreign control over the growing Christian movement. This approach was revolutionary for its time. Many colonial missionaries maintained paternalistic attitudes toward the people they served, but the Eltons understood something profound about the nature of true ministry. They recognized that their role was not to permanently lead Nigerian churches, but to equip Nigerian leaders to shepherd their own people. Ruth inherited this philosophy and would carry it forward throughout her own ministry. As Ruth grew from childhood into adolescence, she felt a divine call to missionary work stirring in her own heart. This was not simply the result of growing up in a missionary family or the natural progression of someone raised in Christian service. It was a distinct, personal encounter with God's calling on her life that would prove to be unshakable throughout the decades that followed. Ruth attended mission schools in Nigeria, which provided her with an excellent education that grounded her in both Christian teachings and the cultural realities of her adopted home. These schools were unique institutions that sought to provide Western quality education while respecting and incorporating African cultural values. Through this educational experience, Ruth gained not only academic knowledge, but also a deep understanding of how to bridge different worlds. Perhaps more importantly, Ruth developed an extraordinary linguistic ability that would become one of her greatest ministry assets. She became fluent in Yoruba, Ebira, and Pidgin English, along with her native English. This was not the superficial language learning of a short-term visitor, but the deep, nuanced fluency of someone who had absorbed these languages at the heart level. She could think, dream, and feel in multiple languages, allowing her to connect with people at the deepest levels of their cultural identity. Her particular connection with the Ebira and Igala people in Kogi State became one of the defining features of her ministry. These communities embraced her not as a foreign missionary, but as one of their own, someone who understood their struggles, celebrated their victories, and spoke their heart language in every sense of the phrase. As Ruth reached marriageable age, she faced a decision that would define the rest of her life. She made a conscious choice to remain unmarried, embracing celibacy as a complete commitment to her missionary calling. This was not a decision made lightly or out of lack of opportunity. She was a beautiful, intelligent, and accomplished young woman who certainly had suitors. But Ruth believed that no potential husband could match her passion for gospel work, and she chose to dedicate her life entirely to serving God and the Nigerian people. This choice reflected her profound sense of purpose and sacrifice. In both British and Nigerian cultures of the time, marriage and motherhood were considered the natural and expected path for women. By choosing singleness, Ruth was stepping outside social expectations and prioritizing her mission over personal fulfillment in ways that required tremendous courage and conviction. Her decision was not about rejecting marriage or family life as inferior choices, but about recognizing that her specific calling required the kind of total availability that single life could provide. She understood that her ministry would demand travel, flexibility, and the ability to respond immediately to needs and opportunities as they arose. Ruth's missionary efforts spanned several decades and covered multiple regions throughout Nigeria. Her work took her to Egbe, Ebira, Okene, and Koton Karf in Kogi State, as well as locations in Ondo, Oyo, and Osun States. This was not the comfortable, centralized ministry of someone who set up in one location and waited for people to come to them. Ruth was constantly on the move, going wherever the need was greatest and the opportunities most promising. Her approach to missionary work extended far beyond evangelism and church planting. Ruth understood that the gospel had to address the whole person and the entire community, not just spiritual needs in isolation from practical realities. In Okene, she discovered that infant mortality rates were tragically high, largely due to preventable causes related to hygiene, nutrition, and childcare practices. Rather than simply preaching about eternal life while ignoring the immediate threats to physical life, Ruth rolled up her sleeves and tackled these challenges head-on. She began teaching mothers about proper hygiene practices, nutritious feeding methods, and effective childcare techniques. Some of the practices she challenged, such as force-feeding infants, were deeply ingrained in local tradition, making her work both delicate and courageous. This practical approach to ministry, which combined spiritual guidance with tangible community support, earned Ruth widespread respect, and the affectionate Ebira name Amatir, meaning one who does good. This name was not merely a polite title, but a genuine expression of how the communities she served viewed her impact on their lives. She was not seen as someone who came with foreign solutions to local problems, but as someone who cared enough to understand their challenges and work alongside them to find better ways forward.